for our newspaper review. What's making the headlines around the world? Well, in the Washington Post online, extensive coverage continues on Hurricane Harvey as the floodwaters recede in Texas. Forecasters now also have their eyes on two more storms brewing in the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico.
On the front page of the Financial Times is the latest round of tense Brexit discussions between the UK and EU. Michel Barnier, the chief EU negotiator, said there's been no decisive progress.
Well, in The Guardian, the boss of Ryanair says disrupting flights between the UK and EU will be the easiest and quickest way to stick it to the British. CEO Michael O'Leary is quoted saying Theresa May should stop drinking sake in Japan and return to handle Brexit talks.
And the New York Times has the headline, "The Danger in Trump Talking to North Korea." An analyst on East Asian affairs says North Korea is increasing tensions to pressure the US into direct talks with Kim Jong-un and describes it all as a big trap.
And finally, in The Times, Italian Prosecco makers and British dentists are locked in a row. It comes after dentists warned of the so-called Prosecco smile. They claim it's a triple whammy of carbonation, sweetness and alcohol that can rot teeth. The Italian Agriculture Minister has denounced the comments as fake news. So put yours away, Rachel. No more Prosecco this morning, OK?
Leave it in the green room.
Well, with us now is Alpesh Patel, who's CEO of Perfinium Partners. Welcome to you.
Morning.
Take us through the papers
Thank
now.
you.
And we're going to start with Hurricane Harvey and the devastation it's causing, but also warnings of two more monster storms to come to hit the area.
Yeah, well, that part's the tragic part, that apparently they've not even seen the worst of it yet. This channel gets accused of being fake news by the President of the United States. Well, I'm going to say something which he might like. There's something truthfully said, which is, you know, if there's one part of the world which can handle this, it's Texas, it's the United States. You heard it here first. I don't know if he'll change his view about the BBC, but
maybe
there is just about me probably. There is that slight glimmer of good news that it's one of the wealthiest states and it's one of the wealthiest countries. You wouldn't wish this upon anyone. And yes, they haven't seen the worst of it. What's tragic is about this chemical plant. It reminds me of Fukushima in Japan. Who the heck doesn't have power backups to allow for flooding, given that you're in a flooding zone? I think there's going to be some heads to roll on that one, hopefully.
Some interesting stories being picked out by the Washington Post. Beaumont, 118,000 people without drinking water. 40 miles southwest of that, the employees of an alligator farm circling their flooded properties in boats with guns at the ready. An alligator farm becoming flooded.
Not good.
I mean, when you look at these stories initially, you see the storm, you see the devastation, but when you start to break it down to all of the consequences from this, they talk about, you know, the dangers coming at them from every angle to these people.
Yeah, and again, if I was to put, you know, a slightly positive angle to this, the $6 billion, it's probably the only thing he's going to get through Congress. He will get the money, the president will get the money that the state is going to request. And also, compared to Katrina, the loss of life, and of course we don't know the exact figures, looks far, far smaller. They seem far better prepared than they were however many years ago Katrina happened. So there are some upsides to how they're managing this and how this is progressing. When you look at the floods in Asia, you look at the floods in India at the moment, nowhere near as positive the way they're handling it out there.
Also in Texas, a lot of people helping each other, aren't they?
Yeah.
OK, let's talk about Brexit. Perhaps not so many people helping each other. Very, very sort of cold press conference we saw yesterday. Felt quite stilted and hesitant, didn't it? And then those words saying no decisive progress from Michel Barnier. Not what UK businesses wanted to hear. Well,
actually, it's interesting what you said. It's a very serious point to that element for this reason. Anybody who remembers their economics, if they did economics and remembers game theory, will know there's this concept of the prisoner's dilemma, where two rational parties come to a decision which is worse for both. I'm not going to go into it here, obviously. People can Google it or whatever. The only way that works out, so you've got two rational parties, hopefully rational parties, the UK and the EU. The only way that works out to mutual benefit is there's some degree of empathy, care between the two. And like you said, that seems to be in low supply. You could very easily, in game theory and economics, will forecast it, not that economics often forecast things right anyway, that you could end up with a mutually dissatisfactory deal for both sides. And that's what I'm putting my money on, I'm afraid. And similarly, with negotiating something so complicated, I think we're simply going to run out of man hours. You can throw as many people as you want at it, we're going to run out of time in any event. We'll hopefully just get the Northern Ireland border sorted. That'll probably be about it.
Well, that's the one area where they said some progress.
Well, that's why you've got empathy.
Citizens' rights.
That's because you've got empathy, and we know there's empathy on both sides, but everything else there isn't. Where there isn't empathy, they're probably going to come out with the worst solution for both sides, economically and politically. It's just a question of just the clock ticking, or the top clicking, and that's what will probably end up happening, I think.
Now, you talked about rational negotiations here. Is this rational from the Ryanair boss, Michael O'Leary? He's saying that the EU can disrupt aviation to, in his words, stick it to the British. He's saying that there needs to be a timetable in place a year in advance every year, and actually the EU can hold the UK to ransom over flight schedules. Is that the case?
Yeah, it looks like Armageddon, end of the world. Apparently, there's not going to be any flights between Britain. It's going to be cut off. There's going to be hard sky borders. There's not going to be any flights between the two countries. It's going to be easier to get to North Korea than to get to the EU. And Ryanair should shut up shop now. And I don't know how its share price is doing, but if the CEO is panicking this much, I should think that it should be in liquidation within 12 months. Great management. Mr. CEO. I mean, after all, he was saying to the British Prime Minister she shouldn't be out there. Maybe I should say to the CEO of this company, this is not how you run a company.
This is the sort of bombastic chat that you would expect, though, from Michael O'Leary. Do you think these comments will have any impact?
No, not at all. I think it's good. It'll remind people that, oh, we better get a Ryanair flight. I know, it's free advertising. I just do not see the rationality of him jumping up and down, panicking his shareholders, his investors, his board of directors, and his customers, who will most probably say, well, you know, that summer holiday next year or the year after, maybe don't book it through Ryanair. Maybe look at another airline.
When he was accused of being hysterical, he did say he didn't really believe there'll be disruption to flights. So there we go. Just a headline.
I worry about CEOs sometimes.
Another CEO, the CEO of the US, the danger in Trump talking to North Korea.
Yeah, this is an interesting article. Trump has said, look, this North Korean leader's a petulant boy, and you might argue Trump would know, and I don't want to talk to him. But some analysts are saying, well, that's probably good news, because if Donald Trump talks to him, and this chap's got nuclear weapons, God knows what's going to happen. What I think we actually need in the West is, given that Guam is what the Russians and Chinese want the Americans out of, it's like sort of the Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. We don't want the Russians in Cuba, they don't want the Americans in Guam. We could have done with a really handy local dictator to put some pressure on the Russians and the Chinese and say, look, we've got one of our nut jobs as well around for you to do our bidding. The Russians and the Chinese are loving this, because they want to reduce American power. They want to see Americans squirm in that part of the world. Sadly, we got rid of all the dictators around the world. We haven't got anybody to rely on at the moment. Believe it or not, dictators do serve a useful purpose. We used to have them in the 60s and the 70s. I'm not longing for the good old days of dictatorships. Would have been really handy right now when the Russians have got their little dictator and the Chinese have got their little dictator on their puppet string.
Well, but what do you think is going to happen here, though? Because if Donald Trump talks to Kim Jong-un, that would be hugely significant.
Donald Trump will tweet, and Kim's going to keep on firing missiles.
You can't really imagine the two of them in a room, can you?
How that would go. He said he wanted to, but
sit down would give North Korea.
And the North Koreans want
money.
money. They want bribes. They've been getting bribes. The President of the United States knows when he gets all the confidential briefings that, oh my God, look at how many billions the Americans have been channeling to bribe the North Koreans not to develop nuclear weapons, and they've done it anyway, and they want a bit more money, and the Chinese and the Russians want the Americans out of that region. But where's our concession? What do we get in return from the Russians and the Chinese, we as in the West, if the Americans do reduce a bit of their naval power over there? And why should they bribe Kim in any event?
After all that, I think we need a drink, but don't let it be Prosecco, because we're going to... Well, apparently British dentists are really upsetting the Prosecco makers in Italy, because they've been warning that it can rot teeth, and there's apparently an Anglo-Saxon plot to disrupt all Prosecco businesses.
I can't believe how annoyed the Italians got over this. I mean, you can't listen to dentists about healthcare and dental hygiene. They'll tell you to eat broccoli and drink water. You know, so they're saying,
yeah, tell my kids.
But it's called the Prosecco smile. Yeah. Apparently, dentists can spot it at 10 paces. The teeth start to rot near the gum.
Dentists are obsessed with clean tea. Oh, drink your Prosecco, and you won't be able to see it anyway because you're going to have this hazed look about your face if you're drinking Prosecco.
But they reckon it's a British beer lobbyists of encouraging.
Yeah, I can't believe it. The Italians
don't think you're going to get somebody who drinks Prosecco is not necessarily going to turn to a pale ale.
It's a conspiracy theory that, I can't believe the Italians are up in arms over it. It's our retaliation for Brexit. That's what it is. It is a conspiracy if they're watching.
I can see it, yeah, all of us turning away from Prosecco. Alpesh, thank you very much. Stay with us here on BBC World News. All the headlines coming up shortly.